And I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. I wish to begin by drawing attention to the fact that the theme of the briefing that has been approved under the Program of Work for the Security Council for the month of December, to a certain degree, is a departure from what has been proposed that we discussed today. According to the note, we believe that supplanting questions of terrorism with a politicized notion of preventing violent extremism is something which you certainly were aware of, that this might be met with a negative response. In my statement, I will focus myself on the initial purpose of the meeting, which provides for a discussion of the sources of terrorist threats in West Africa, exchange of views with the afflicted countries, and consideration of ways to end these crises with the participation of key international bodies. In this connection, I wish to thank Mr. Mohamed Chambaz and Mr. Ismail Shargi for their detailed briefings and for the experience that they have amassed, for their assessments of the situation that has been set out by the bodies which they head. Madam, the Russian Federation extends its sincere condolences to the people and government of Niger in connection with the death on 10 December of more than 70 Nigerian military personnel. This was a consequence of a terrorist attack targeting a military camp nearing the border with Mali. We trust that the perpetrators of this atrocious crime will be identified and that they will be duly punished. We reaffirm our full support to Niamey in the fight against the terrorist threat. The horrific events which transpired in Niger unfortunately point to a further deterioration of the security situation in this part of Africa. On a virtually weekly basis, we receive tragic reports about the deaths of dozens of military personnel or civilians in the hands of members of the criminal underground in parts of Africa. The threat of destabilization now looms over the states of the Gulf of Guinea as well. We share the concerns of other members of the Security Council vis-à-vis the fact that Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and ISIL have strengthened their foothold in Africa. We are particularly troubled by the fact that the Islamic State in West Africa has taken shape, and it consistently proclaims the objective of building a universal caliphate in countries in the region, and it is engaged in active terrorist activity at the juncture of the border between Cameroon, Nigeria, Niger, and Chad. Disorderly migration flows enable terrorists to capitalize on economic woes and enables terrorists to recruit new personnel. In the destroyed and in some instances inchoate systems of arms control, the endless cross-border smuggling, including in narcotics, have enabled terrorist groups to provide themselves with a robust resource base. Madam President, some countries are attempting to show today that the root cause for the outbreak of violence in the region are conflicts between farmers and nomadic herders. In any event, this is what we have seen in the concept note for today's meeting. And indeed, this is not a root cause, but rather a consequence of what is transpiring. On the whole, we do not agree that the real sources of terrorism in Africa are merely linked to domestic, economic, and political woes. There is a need to embrace a balanced approach, an approach that reflects the whole array of problems that spawn terrorism, including external intervention. And this was made clear, starkly clear, for example, in Syria and Libya. West African states find themselves having been forced to reap the fruits of the collapse of Libyan statehood. And this was a consequence of the NATO intervention. We believe that absent normalization of the situation in that country, I speak of Libya, and this is something which Africans themselves tell us, absent this, it is virtually impossible to reliably stabilize the region. instead of responding honestly to the question of why in certain countries in the region a power vacuum has surfaced, and instead of addressing where terrorists receive their weapon stockpiles, our Western partners are attempting to placate West African states with myriad programs on the basis of what they unilaterally devise, namely the concept of preventing violent extremism. In the absence of a universally acknowledged definition for violent extremism set out in international law, we call upon partners to eschew terminology that does not enjoy consensus, such innovations as, I quote, homegrown violent extremist organizations. Work directly with civil society in circumvention of government, which lies at the heart of the preventing violent extremism concept, in our view, sets the stage for intervention in domestic affairs, including with the purposes of provoking colored revolutions or their analogs. I wish to stress the following. The idea in and of itself of harnessing civil society together with bolstering the law enforcement component in counterterrorism is something which we do not dispute. However, this potential needs to be tapped into in a manner that reflects the specificities and traditions of states without diluting their leading role in counterterrorism, with an emphasis on international legal norms rather than any rules of the world order. If the sponsors of the preventing violent extremism concept really wish to demonstrate its effectiveness, let them first, on their territories, attempt to delegate law enforcement functions to non-state actors or structures. We doubt that this will help them to resolve the pressing issues of the proliferation of xenophobic and neo-Nazi ideology, the activization of the extreme right organizations, which advocate violence on the basis of targeting race, ethnicity, and other faiths. For the moment, the selective activity on the basis of preventing violent extremism with an emphasis on developing countries appears to be a tool for political manipulation. We believe that the only way to effectively counter the threat of terrorism is avoiding double standards and on the basis of a comprehensive approach which brings together robust law enforcement and multifaceted preventive activity. We believe that there's an important to further coordinate efforts, both on the part of African representatives and the international community, to counter terrorism in the Sahel-Sahara region. In this connection, we support the efforts of the Sahel 5 states and those of the Lake Chad Basin to deploy forces to counter terrorism and organized crime. There is a need to effectively ward off the proliferation of extremist ideology, to tackle head-on pressing socioeconomic issues, to build up institutions of state governance, and to inculcate a culture of respect for human rights. In this connection, we attribute a greater importance to implementation of the UN Comprehensive Strategy for the Sahel and the activities in the region of the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel. Moreover, we support what was adopted during the summit in Niamey, namely the decision of ECOWAS member states to invest up to $1 billion to improve the state of affairs in the region. Russia is closely following developments in West Africa and the Sahel. We have already provided a number of countries with relevant military and technical assistance. We are helping to train military and police personnel. We call upon all states to bolster multifaceted cooperation to counter terrorism with countries in the region, not limiting themselves merely to the question of settling intercommunal disputes, and not supplanting such efforts with abstract speculation about the threat of violent extremism. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.